let's start the next session. It starts with a panel discussion. Let me introduce the panelists and the moderator. So, Ananda Ladi. Anand is the Chief Learning Officer for Edureka. He's been a senior advisor and partner with Zinov and earlier SVP at Mindtree. He has a fair bit of good understanding, and always been a mentor and advisor for us as well. So Anand, Hemant. Hemant is the India head for Hardness. He's the partner with Jyoti Bansal, trying to create something really big with continuous deployment and delivery as a service. Hemant earlier was the CTO of Rivigo, as well as he used to head Cloudtail, the Adobe product from a dev perspective earlier. Chetan was the founder and CEO of Vizury. He grew Vizury from effectively a bootstrapped company to having more than 10,000 plus customers on the marketing cloud side, and has fair bit of expertise on the digital marketing side. And Anuj has been our friend and advisor. He represents Omanvat and is a consulting firm himself, advisory firm himself. Anuj has experience from AWS, and has more expertise of working with startups and larger companies in terms of cloud migration and deployment. Thank you.
I think we are very honored to have the panel that is seated in front of you. Very learned, lots of experience, and they will not shy away from taking controversial stands if they think that's the right stand. So that's what we are going to try and discuss, and hopefully agree on a certain thing that's probably true. The topic is, B2B companies adopting B2C technologies. So broadly, that's the topic. There is obviously an assumption in that statement. So we'll try and make it not prescriptive. Hopefully at the end of it, we'll figure out who is the leader. Is B2C the leader or B2B the leader? Or it's not well defined, it's not very well prescribed or settled yet. Maybe there are certain areas where B2C takes the lead, and there are certain areas where B2B takes the lead. So I'll request you to hold on to your thoughts and questions till the end. We promise we'll give you around 10 minutes to ask your questions to this panel, great panel, and then we'll have a good time for the next 40 minutes or so. So what I would request is maybe I'll request each of the panelists to share their views on this topic for a few minutes, and then I'll ask them a set of open-ended questions. Hopefully you'll get some ideas, and then we'll request you to share your thoughts and ask your questions, and then we'll conclude. That's going to be the flow. Maybe I'll request Hemant to start.
Hey guys, I hope you're doing good today. I think what I want to start with is about 3-4 different trends that are really shaping up the way technology is evolving, the way products are being built, and how B2B and B2C models are coming along. So first one is really about everyone is a consumer today, right? And we have seen, right, we bring work home, we bring home to our work. Similarly, we are sometimes customers of a B2C product, sometimes we are seller of or provider of B2B product, right? So what I'm really trying to say is I don't see that the gap is really reducing, it's narrowing between how we are consuming the product. Our expectations are same. It's not changing much, is what I'm seeing. The second thing is, really about every organization is trying to make customers more successful. And what is really happening is, and what I'm seeing is that this whole customer centricity is making companies to think more and more about how do they make their end customer successful, right? So for example, if I'm selling a B2B software to a company that is B2C, I'm actually thinking about what are the challenges that my B2C company is actually facing in making their customers successful, right? So my plan, my thinking, my methodology is changing, right? And the way I'm building software or what I'm doing is changing based on those trends that I'm seeing. The third one that I'm seeing is SaaS is a reality, right? It's everywhere. And now what SaaS has really done is it has reduced the friction and you just sign up and you're ready to go, right? So that is having a huge influence. For example, in the architecture that we are choosing, or for example, the go-to-market strategy that we are choosing, right? Gone are the days where you think about several weeks, for a GTM strategy for something that you have built, right? You want to ship it out immediately, right? So that's kind of the third thing. And fourth thing is really very interesting, is that self-service models are becoming priority, right? And obviously B2C have an edge over there because they deal with large number of customers, right? And they can't put another guy, one more person in their organization to talk to that particular customer, right? B2B are thinking the same way, right? Because, why? Because the business model has changed, right? We are selling software as a subscription-based software. And I know if customers are not happy, they're not going to buy my product again, right? So, and I want more and more customers to be successful on their own. So the self-service model is really becoming priority. So these are kind of, the four different things that I see happening and that are shaping up how we are doing things.
Thank you, Hemant. I think you've clearly taken a stand. Let's see if you're going to change it by the time we terminate our panel discussion. Chetan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. In the sort of worldview I have between B2B and B2C, I essentially look at it as a continuum. So on the left-hand side, essentially is the B2B large enterprises, and then the software and technology needs that they have. Comes down to mid-market, which is essentially the medium-sized enterprises and their needs, then the small businesses. So you have a few hundred of these, you have a few tens of thousands of these, you have millions of these, and you have billions of consumers on the right-hand side. Right, so this is essentially a continuum with large B2B enterprises at one end and the consumers at the other. And I have had the fortune of sort of running a B2B company focused on B2C customers. So I have seen both sides of the world in terms of what one can learn from other. And there are three things that stand out in terms of what B2B companies are really beginning to learn and adapt from B2C companies as such. The first one is essentially around personalization, right? So if you look at the way B2C companies and especially Amazon comes to everybody's mind when you think of personalization, they have taken personalization to the next level, right, in terms of marketing to selling to customer service and so on. That has been at the cutting edge on the B2C side. Now what is beginning to happen is B2B companies also are certainly beginning to catch up on the personalization side. So when it comes to reaching out to customers, when the emails go out, and I'm sure a lot of you guys send out cold emails, there is certainly a much more larger context attached to it now as opposed to, let's say, 10 years ago when cold emails used to go out. Right? So personalization is one of the large big trends that has been very prevalent on the B2C world, but B2B guys are beginning to learn and adapt. The second thing has been around mobile actually. Right? Again, if you look at the adoption of mobile and the technologies built around it, B2C companies essentially led the way. Right, both from the standpoint of convenience and from the standpoint of essentially experience. B2C companies have been far ahead in terms of the cycle. But if you look at all the new wave of software that is built for B2B enterprises, there is a very meaningful mobile component to it. And there is a large set of softwares. For example, if you look at field softwares and so on, they are actually mobile first and desktop next. Right, so the adoption of mobile as a sort of big trend on the B2B side and the learnings there, and that beginning to percolate into the B2B world is the second thing that I would certainly want to point out. The third bit is on the digital side, right? And this is essentially around, yeah, when you look at channels of communication that B2C companies had, let's say 15 years ago, it was predominantly offline, right? It was TV and offline touch points and radio and newspaper and phone calls and so on. But with the advent of digital, yeah, again, B2C companies were the first ones to jump in and adapt that channel and make that as a mainstay in terms of multiple things that they would do. B2B sort of companies were again a few years behind, so they were still event centric, they were more again offline channel centric, but it's becoming an essential part of the marketing and engagement mix, digital, even for B2B companies. So yeah, I mean, those are the three things that I see B2B companies beginning to learn very fast from B2C side.
Yeah, thank you, Chetan. You started on a very nice philosophical note, but then as you tried to wind up your thoughts, you obviously again took another clear stand. You know, I'll have a probing question on you, maybe to start with, after Anuj talks about his views.
Awesome, thanks. So very quick, rejoinder. So my colleague and partner and I run a SaaS sales organization. So we don't do any consulting. And the reason why I'm clarifying that is, because it has bearing on what I'm going to talk about. We sell software in India, mostly Indian softwares. I'll start with a very short story, or rather, it's a factual story. One of the neighbors where I live, is based out of Darbhanga. If some of you are from that part of the country, and he runs a set of warehouses. So about a year back or so, he started he kind of started going towards the digitization of his his warehouses. Kind of got a warehousing management system implemented, and about a month back or so, I was catching up with him, and he said, I'm looking for somebody who can build a mobile app for me. And he said, the problem for me is that the development of all this is happening in Bangalore, or maybe the 8 metros, but the client, and I'll come to that in a second, the client is a farmer. Now, the problem with IT and a lot of us is that our definitions are so centric towards, so inward centric, B2B, B2C, B2B2C. I think both the the panelists before me spoke about one fundamental thing, that who is the client, irrespective of who is the client, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a business as a customer. Ultimately, we are talking about client. Even if it's a business, ultimately GE also sells to a customer. Now, as long as our business model, whatever we are building, is focused towards addressing the need of the customer, irrespective of what that profile or the persona is, I think we are on the right track. Unfortunately, that's a big problem. And in this case, so he says that every designer, every UX designer, and I'll come to that after the initial remarks. Every designer worth his salt, talks about building a great app, great UX and so on and so forth. But you have to think about, when I am putting a sale for say 20,000 tons of gehu, wheat, between 11 to 11:30 in the night for a kisan, for a farmer. I want somebody to be able to think like the farmer. I'm a B2B, you are selling to me, but ultimately my customer is the kisan. Now, I need a product, or the designer who should be able to think like a farmer and able to design a product for him, not for somebody sitting in Bangalore and browsing, some fashion apparel on Myntra or Amazon. I think that's the fundamental problem. Till we are able to solve, I know Chen spoke about the personalization piece. I think we are still personalizing for maybe 20-30 million Indians. Personalization will never work if we have to go into the next 100 million, 200 million, 250 million. I think personalization will have to really go beyond the semantics, and we'll have to really start getting deeper. So that's my initial thoughts on it.
Great, yeah, thank you, Anuj. I think his thoughts are pretty well aligned. And, from now on, you're going to be my best friend forever. So taking on from what Anuj just now expressed, let's now try and convince Chetan a little more and try and change his views. Chetan, at the end of it, doesn't the whole world start and end with a consumer? Uh, you know, if you talk about a B2B business, finally through a chain of B2Bs or B2Cs, it reaches the consumer, right? So why is there a big differentiation between B2B or B2C? I mean, finally, any technology that's going to get deployed or designed or developed is keeping the end consumer in mind, which is you and I.
Sure. So, I think philosophically what you're saying is absolutely right. But when you're dealing with sort of businesses as opposed to end consumers, there are two or three very clear differences that essentially come in, because of which I think customer centricity gets misaligned, if not lost. The first one is when you're selling to a business, the buyer may not be the same as the consumer of the product that you're trying to sell, right? So the buyer may be the chief marketing officer, but the consumer may be the marketing manager, right? And so while the chief marketing officer is philosophically aligned with the product and the strategy that you have, and hence he is buying it, maybe the experience of the consumer at a marketing manager level may not be in the sort of best of the breed out there in the market, which as a consumer you would expect. So that is one big gap that I see when businesses are buying versus a consumer is buying. That's sort of one reason that comes to my mind. The second thing also is, I think, just the way companies, businesses are structured, and the way the purchase happens, versus, yeah, when you look at consumers and the way that we buy. Yeah, I think companies essentially, yeah, want to have, I mean, if you look at the top five parameters, I think the majority of the software or technology that they're buying guarantee, I mean, Gartner stamp on it and some of those things become relatively more important than experience. So just the priority assigned to experience as such is there in the mix, but I don't think that's the number one thing. So those are a couple of reasons that come to my mind. I think it's more practical difficulty of putting consumer in the middle when B2B companies are actually buying, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, thank you. I think we should challenge him a little more as the panel progresses. Let's now talk to Hemant. Hemant, let's talk about product development technologies. And I know your initial inclination will be to talk about software products, but I think I'd request you to increase your horizon and talk about all kinds of products, right? So when you talk about product development technologies, and this is where I would just give it into B2C segment, I think they have taken a lead, and B2B segment has most often followed B2C. Would you agree with it, or if yes, why is it so? If no, why is it so?
So yeah, so that's an interesting question. So I think what really started happening, right? I mean, like Anuj said, right? Ultimately the customer or the consumer that you're talking about, right? Who's actually using the product. But at some point in time, people started talking about, the difference between B2B, B2C, and I think one of the big reason was the way the behavior of and how do you kind of define the persona of people who are using the product, or how you are building the product, right? Now, when you are building a product for a B2B, right, the way you are going to think about building the product is sometimes different, right? Because in terms of the scale that you are thinking, or in terms of repeatability of the way people are going to use the product. So there are, slight differences in which people are using the product. And that's the big reason for, doing this kind of classification. But ultimately, you know, like if I'm starting a company, or if somebody is starting a company, they are not going to actually think about whether it's a B2B or whether it's a B2C. They're actually going to think about what can I do to make my product successful with the people, right, who are going to use it, who are going to pay for my bills, right? So I mean, like, who's following what, where, what is happening? I think when you really get down and start building products or delivering successes to your customer, you're not really thinking about that way. And I think if you're thinking that way, I don't think that's the right approach, right? And so I mean that's what my thought process is.
Great, yeah, thank you. Anuj, over to you. I think you're probably the best amongst the four of us to answer this question. See, when it comes to, finally B2C or B2B, you're after sales, you're after revenues, right? And so when it comes to sales methodologies and technologies, whether what kind of a customer relationship management tool to use, how do you access and reach out to your customers or consumers? There are a whole lot of things that has to be done when it comes to sales and marketing on methodologies and technologies. Who do you think has taken a lead here? Who is playing the leader role and who is playing the follower role?
So, honestly, I don't think I have an answer to this, but I'll give you my view on what I think about uh, could be some of the ways. Again, if you go back to the definition of B2C and B2B, I'll take an example. I use Citibank as my main bank. They have one of the most pathetic mobile apps you can think of. Now, is it a B2C platform or is it a B2B platform? Uh, Versus, if you look at Flipkart or you look at Amazon, they have world-class UI, they have world-class products. Now, a bank which is one of the biggest banks in the world, it's my experience. Again, if you look at personalization, is very contextual. I do not like the app. Does it mean you may not? You will, or you may. Uh, so the line between B2B and B2C, as earlier also we spoke about, is blurring a lot. So what is B2B and what is B2C itself is a very uh, if you ask me, very contextual and very contentious, if you ask me. But coming to that, I think given the sheer size of B2C, if I were to still call that as a definition, given the size we are talking about, uh, I think digital is a more uh, preferred mode of marketing and sales, because you can scale better. In B2B, because the fact that you still need to build a relation with the CIO or the CTO or the CLO or the CXO, so to say. I think it's still very face to face. It is still very very on the face, if you will. So if you were to ask me what would work where, I don't think there is a right model. But by and large, B2C would fall a lot more on the digital side, digital marketing, digital selling, the do-it-yourself models. Whereas B2B predominantly will continue to be more face-to-face, and at least for the time being.
I want to quickly
please.
add a point. I think just extending what Anuj said, I think for a B2B kind of thing, the sales cycle, for example, are larger, right? So the number of touch points and what you have to do is totally different. And you don't see a lot of impulse buying, for example, in a B2B segment, right? So for B2C, having digital and those kind of things totally make sense. But B2B, maybe the ticket size can be sometimes much larger, and you are also looking at a long-term sort of buying pattern, right? For example, a Flipkart customer can go to Amazon very quickly and easily, but for a B2B, the longevity of customer is another aspect that come into picture.
Yeah, just to, if you don't mind, just to, just complement one more point there. Given the dynamics of the B2C and B2B models, I think the whole product development is also a very different piece, which means that, in B2C, there is no concept of, if you will, POC. As in you can trial, but you can trial a apparel, but that's it. Whereas when you do a B2B, obviously, and I'm sure you'll agree, the kind of the trial cycles, and we talk about, you do a 6 months trial, and after 6 months customer says not interested. uh, Here, your returns will happen the same day. That's okay. You discard them and move on. I think the churn rate is much higher in B2C, but given the scale, I think you can still make up, whereas in B2B, that's a big problem.
Thank you both. Hemant, a question to you, and it's primarily related to the context under which we are all sitting here. See, if I were a company like HashedIn, building my niche, known in the market for 3, 4 great areas: SaaS, API integration, DevOps, user experience, and user design, right? And there are not too many companies which can claim such good capabilities in these spaces, and few more. Where would I, as a strategy, where would I learn these from? Capabilities from? Should I just focus on B2C or B2B or both? What would be your thoughts?
So, interesting one. I may not, be able to really recommend a lot of things, but what I would look at is who are the companies, that are most successful in each of these areas, and what are they really doing? What is working well for them, right? Because that kind of give me a benchmark as to, these top 5% companies in these areas. And what is their secret sauce, etc. So that's one way to look at in terms of capturing the market. And also, I think looking at some of these successes will also give me an idea about what kind of customers do these companies are targeting, for example, right? And for example, if you talk about SaaS or DevOps or some of the other things that you mentioned, right? So there are instances where companies have been successful, and I think they have some pretty interesting strategies. Some companies have also sort of transformed themselves, right, from where they used to be. And these are, some really big companies and organizations who have moved from, for example, a lot of on-prem to cloud-based, and then further SaaS-based microservices or whatever things that are, right? So, yeah, a lot of interesting things to learn from some of those successes.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Hemant. Chetan, a little bit of a controversial question to you. When I travel by air or when I go to the bank, I think I get more irritated now than the irritation levels that was there 10 years ago, and that's primarily related to shadow work. In the name of technology adoptions, I feel B2C companies have increased the amount of shadow work on the consumer. Today before I fly, I have to print my boarding pass. If I make a draft, I have to log in and do the draft, right? And if I have to call a banking customer relationship desk, I have to enter 500 options. Press 1 if you are this, press 2 this, hold on for 2 minutes, I'll connect you to this. This is all crappy shadow work that the consumers are doing it. I don't think we are spending that time productively. And I think B2C companies have taken us for a ride. So Chetan, question to you, is it right? Where is it going to end? Are we all realizing, are we getting taken for a ride, or we are enjoying it? What do you think?
Yeah, probably that's one thing that B2C guys have learned from B2B guys. So, making you do work. I think, yeah, what is happening is essentially organizations are becoming open APIs themselves. Right, so there are these multiple touch points that were more internal focused earlier for a B2B company, an airline, for example, because their internal systems were not, internal systems and processes were not mature enough to be able to productize it. Right, so this was essentially a lot of Excels moving back and forth. There was a lot of ad hoc processes and a lot of escalations happening. But as those things have crystallized and technologies have come into being that can actually productize them, a customer service or as you said, a boarding pass, printing, a sort of check-in, multiple things have been opened up in the form of quote unquote APIs, right, for the consumers to use. Of course, with a set of guidelines. I think, yeah, this will only sort of carry on even further. So, if you look at the heart of it, if you consider an airline as a product, and at the heart of that product is technology, the heart is essentially getting APIized, right? So everything is sort of going the API way. Now, if the core technology is going the API way, I think there will be ripple effects outside in terms of all the touch points that the companies have. Yeah, so that's my viewpoint.
Yeah, please.
So, hello, yeah. So I think one interesting trend, I think from the airlines example that I'm seeing, and by the way, I see AirAsia having your own check-in counters, like you have to put your own luggage in there, so it's going to only increase. I think what I also feel is what companies are doing is they're trying to reduce the cost of customer acquisition. And for a B2C company, the number of customers that they have are fairly large, right? So the cost escalates very rapidly in terms of the cost of customer acquisition, right? Um, uh, for B2B companies, what happens is they are sometimes able to adjust that cost when they are doing or negotiating a deal. So they are in a slightly better position. And the second thing is a B2C product sometimes can be a more commodity based. Like if you look at an airlines example, right? If I have to go to Hyderabad or Delhi, I can take a variety of airlines, right? My experience is not going to differ as much. But for a lot of B2B companies, they can really differentiate on the product. So for them, the pricing, etc., can take care of some part of the cost of customer acquisition.
Great, yeah, thank you. I think about a year and a half ago, I had this upma that was sold to me by an Indigo Airlines flight, and I loved it. So the air hostess opened a dabba, opened the cap, and poured some hot water. And after 2 minutes, what I had was probably the best upma I've ever had in my life, including the upma that's cooked by my mother or my wife. Then I realized, I did a little bit of research, then I realized the whole concept of dehydrated food, preserved food, without adding preservatives, was researched and invented in one of the defense research labs, I think out of Mysore. So there are many such examples of technologies coming out of defense, aerospace, building automation that have been adopted by B2C. And I think we are not being fair by not giving credit on such things to B2B. And I wanted to ask a question to Anuj about this. Do you think it's true? If so, why are they not getting the credit? Why are people not talking about it? Why are the management consultants keeping silent on all of these things?
Okay, that's my leftist hat. But so there's this concept called private profits and public loss. So if you look at the valley, right, whether you look at the valley or you look at any technology worth its salt, which has come in the last 50 years, every single of them has originated out of a government lab, whether it is MIT in the US or whether it's Mysore labs. In Mysore, the upma you're speaking about, by the way, that upma has a couple of grams of sugar, because sugar is a preservative, but that's a different story. The fact is that because of the whole capitalistic economy, it is apparent that if you have to do something at scale, you can only do it in the private sector, but then you don't want to incur the losses. So the losses are pushed onto the public sector or the masses, and we have enough examples in the last couple of months around that. But essentially, that's the fact that if research has to be done, research is very, very costly. You cannot do billions of dollars of research in the private sector and think that 10 years down the line I'm working on a genome project. That has to be done in MIT because it's public money. But the moment it becomes viable, then it's transferred to the private sector. I think we all understand, or maybe I hope we understand that it's ultimately just capitalism.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Good thoughts and very different perspective. Chetan, any thoughts on M&A activities when it comes to B2B technologies or B2C technologies? Which one do VCs or PEs favor and why?
I think M&A is a bad word, is it? I think the general trend, and maybe we should just contextualize it to India to start off with, it's been a mixed bag. I mean, if you look at the largest fund out there, SoftBank's fund, $100 billion, and you draw a pie chart in terms of B2C investments versus B2B investments, it's almost 50-50 actually. I mean, you look at them investing in an Oyo or a Flipkart and all these guys and believe that, yeah, it's B2C, but it is not. And I think, yeah, that investment essentially forms the raw material when you move further downstream in terms of the exit opportunities that come up. So it's been a mixed bag, but one of the interesting things has been the acquisition of B2B softwares by B2C companies. Right, and again, the sort of, if you trace back the history, Amazon has essentially been a pioneer in being a B2C company at heart, but a B2B company when it comes to their pockets. Right, so essentially, they've been ferociously customer centric. They've developed a great brand. There's a lot of consumers, hundreds of millions of customers that they have globally. But the way they make money is through B2B technologies. So when you, for example, look at Amazon's revenue streams, there is cloud, of course, there is advertising, there are a set of data set related things that are doing logistics. So a whole set of B2B money making engines that sit on top of B2C enterprises. And I think when you think of M&A, some of these things start coming along and coming together in a very similar fashion.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Hemant, the last question to you before we open it out to the audience. Under the context of agility and faster time to market, I feel the B2C companies have released technologies faster to the consumers and have taken consumers for a ride. I think they should take a little more time to test it out to make sure the product is ready before they're releasing it. Do you agree with it?
Totally, totally. In fact, this has been one of my biggest gripe about the way technology is being done at a lot of B2C companies. I think what B2B companies do a lot, and I've worked at Adobe for about 11 years. There is a huge amount of long-term thinking that goes in building the product, right? And it's not just, a software product or a technology product, right? It's any kind of product. I think I have noticed, B2B companies are much more focused on committing themselves to a long-term quality. B2C companies, and I don't want to, call out names, but I know companies which have released features in the product when those features were actually not built in the product. So sometimes, you want pace, but I mean, not at the cost of really, not doing the right job. So that's been my gripe all the time.
Great, yeah, thank you. At the end of this 30 odd minutes, I think we have a divided house, and hopefully all of you can help us tilt towards the right side. I'll open it out. Maybe we'll have around 6 or 7 minutes to answer your questions. You can do an open-ended question, or you can point it to one of the three panelists. It's all over to you. So please feel free and give them all the three of them. Give all the three of them a little bit of a tough time now. Yes, the first one and the last one are the tough questions, but anybody? Yeah, there are quite a few at the back also.
If you're building a business intelligence application for a bank, it is going to be very different from a business intelligence application that you're building for a FMCG product. It's more consultative, it's more expert oriented. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think without the mic, I was not sure if I've got all the parts of your question right, but from what I made out from the last time, right, like the example that you give, right, for example, if intelligence to be built in a B2B application like banking application versus a FMCG or a consumer oriented application, I feel there is a difference in the approach, and what I see is there are two reasons that comes to my mind when I see that. I think the first one is that for B2B B2B companies, they want to get it right with a higher percentages, right? For consumer-oriented application, the cycles are much quicker and faster, right? So they can experiment quite a bit, and this is primarily driven by, for example, if you go to a bank, right, and ask them, can you upgrade your software every day? They're probably not going to do that, right? Even if they're on SaaS based or on-prem based, it does not matter. But a Flipkart or some of these companies can potentially deploy their whatever changes they are doing almost every day. So this kind of impacts the thinking process and what they are building. I think in terms of capability, I don't see any difference in both B2B or B2C, whether they can do a very similar job. But I think it's just that some of these parameters comes into picture.
Yeah, thank you, Hemant. The next question, please. This mic needs to be provided in the front. You want to come into the front and then we'll. I'll try and paraphrase it for you.
Personalization, contextualization. My background is in content management and digital transformations. We are all viewing information flow in a very traditional sense, but very few channel and webless.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Anuj, you want to just throw in some ideas on this?
So technology, I think from a Western technology perspective, what you say is right. But when it comes to personalization, we keep having this debate sometime. So look at allopathy, right? And it's a slightly different off topic. So the same medicine which is given to Amitabh Bachchan, who is like, I don't know what's his height, but 6'5" or 6'4", for a particular ailment would be given to me, and I don't know, I'm maybe 5'2" or reverse of that. Is that personalization? After 70 years of medicine in the West, Alexa is not the the pinnacle of technology. I think we narrow our definitions of what personalization is based on what Amazon does or what Myntra is doing, or couple of these names. Personalization has to have a very broader perspective when it comes to society in general. Yesterday or day before, there was a news that one of the Israeli startups have kind of found the remedy for cancer, and they're saying in a year they will mass start producing it. Is that technology technology coming to the aid of this? Honestly, I think a lot of these terms, a lot of these things we look at from a very narrow valley lens. Digital technologies or personalization as it relates to how does Alexa throw a couple of personalized songs at me or stuff like that. I think the more we start broad basing it, our whole civilization, and again if I come back to the Indian civilization, I think we have been doing personalization of medicine, for example, forever. thousands of years we have done, right from the days of Shushruth, we have done personalization of medicine to the individual. Homeopathy works on that. Allopathy doesn't, and which is a very, very Western science that way. So I think personalization is very narrow if you ask me from that definition.
Great, yeah. Thank you, Anuj. Maybe we'll have time for one more question.
Yeah, not a question, just a thought. I think number one, thanks. It was a great discussion. A lot of very, very valuable insights came out, and I think each of you shared your viewpoints, every one of which is very, very valuable. But I guess somewhere, I think, at least from a very, very tactical perspective, the idea was to understand the B2C trends that are going to impact the B2B business, right? Or the way B2B businesses are picking up insights from the B2C trends, right? Like as a very simple example, a very transactional example. If I am a consumer today and I want to buy a Philips DVD, I will go and read 500 reviews about it, from which shop to buy, and therefore before I go to the shop, I'm mentally 99% clear, this model, this shop, this price. So the impact of this on the B2B side is that if a company is pitching to a client, it wants to ensure that its Glassdoor reviews are very good, the feedback on the public domain is very good, because it knows that somebody sitting in the prospective client world will go through all this, right? That could be an example of a B2C trend impacting a B2B world, even though the difference between B2B and B2C is getting blurred. I fully agree with you. So I just wanted to check your thoughts on 2 or 3 more such trends that you, being from this industry, would be able to highlight, where you believe that the B2C industry is changing the way the B2B world functions. I just gave one example or one thought. I mean, if there are something else that come to your mind.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Chetan, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, just building on what you said, I have 2 examples. The first one is, just this whole review space, and that's essentially something that has been very pervasive in the B2C world. A lot of us, all of us, I guess, essentially read reviews, consult people before buying. Now that is beginning to reflect in the B2B world, at least the world that I belong to, B2B software world. So there are sort of 2 or 3 companies in the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years that have gotten funded, which essentially publish reviews of people who have used B2B softwares. So there is a site called G2 Crowd, maybe you guys are aware, which is exactly into this space, and they call themselves the Gartner, poor man's Gartner in some way, right? So Gartner reviews 10 and then produces a magic quadrant. These guys review a few hundreds and publish the reviews of all the softwares there. So yeah, I think that is one very specific example. The second example that comes to my mind is going back to the experience discussion we were having. The interesting thing is, within B2B world, again, one of the subsectors that I personally follow is actually called B2D, which is developers, right? And the softwares being sold to developers. The very interesting thing there is, if you look at all the business community that's buying software out there, the guys who are actually behaving like consumers are developers. So you ask any B2D company, I mean, there are a lot of these API companies that sell to developers. The sales there doesn't happen via a guy in coat and suit coming and pitching to a developer saying, buy this product. The way the sale happens is through a soft introduction of the product, the developer researching the product on his own, starting off with a free version and then moving to a paid version. And that's broadly similar to what a B2C consumer would do, which is they would read and then want to buy the product rather than be sold a given product. So those are sort of 2 examples that come to my mind.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Chetan, thank you so much. I think we are running out of time. I can see Harshit giving me the 3rd angry look, saying please wind it up as fast as possible. Thank you so much. I think we should give them a big round of applause. Very honored to have this panel. And please continue to interact. And if you think it's still a divided house, Harshit will probably keep the same topic for the next XaaS conference. That's going to happen soon. Thank you. Thank you so much.